Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and give a like if this story touches something inside you. I still remember the way the light fell through the lace curtains that morning, turning the dust in the air into tiny golden flecks. It was the kind of light that should have promised peace. A quiet day filled with small domestic joys. Yet in my chest there was already the heavy stone of unease. I had grown accustomed to that weight, the silent knowledge that something precious was missing, something that had been torn from me long ago. My daughter, my only child, who vanished into the shadows of the world as though she had never belonged to me at all. Her name, at least, the name I gave her, still catches in my throat when I try to say it aloud. It feels like opening an old wound, one that never healed, only crusted over with silence and shame. When I think back, the memory comes not in clear lines, but in fragments. The soft cry of a newborn against my breast, the smell of talcum powder, the tiny fists curling around my finger. She was so alive then, so full of a promise I thought I could protect. I was young, too young perhaps, and the world around me was far less forgiving than I had dreamed. There were nights when I sat awake in the dark, listening to her breath in the cradle and whispering promises I could never keep, that she would always be safe, that nothing and no one could touch her. Those whispers now echo in my skull like broken vows. The day she disappeared was not a day of storms or calamity, though in my memory it has become darker than any thundercloud. The morning had been ordinary, so deceptively ordinary. I can still smell the bread I had placed in the oven, the way the yeast lifted into the air, warm and full. I can still hear the creak of the wooden floor as she ran across it, her little feet making that skipping rhythm I adored. And then nothing. Silence where her voice had been, emptiness where her presence had filled the room. At first, I told myself she was playing hide and seek, that I would find her tucked behind the cupboard or under the quilt. But the minutes grew heavy, the shadows stretched longer, and she was nowhere. That silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I searched with hands trembling so violently I could barely turn the handles of doors. I called her name until my throat was raw, each syllable falling into the void as if the house itself had swallowed her whole. Neighbors joined, then strangers, and still the earth gave no answer. I remember the cold sweat dripping down my back, the taste of iron in my mouth, the smell of damp soil as I tore at the garden, convinced she had fallen into some hidden place. Hours became days, and days became years. Her absence rooted itself into my bones, growing with me, growing around me, until I was nothing but the shell of a woman carrying the ghost of her child. Every clock I saw after that seemed cruel. The ticking mocked me 1 second further from her, 1 second deeper into the abyss of not knowing. I would dream of her, too, sometimes as the little girl she was, sometimes as the woman she might have become. In those dreams she would reach for me, her eyes questioning, as if asking why I had let her slip away. I would wake, with my hand outstretched, clutching at the empty air, the sheets damp with sweat. There were whispers, of course. People in the village who shook their heads and wondered aloud what kind of mother loses her child. Some suspected accidents, others tragedies, still other sins too dark to be named. Their eyes followed me, filled with accusation, as if I myself had swallowed her into nothingness. I carried their suspicions like chains, each glance another weight upon my back. I wanted to scream at them that I had loved her more than life, that I would have burned myself to ash if it meant she could return. But my voice failed me, always. Years passed, decades even. My hair turned gray, my hands lined with the brittle cracks of time. And then, when I no longer dared to hope, when even my dreams had grown faint, she appeared again. She was standing at my door, her silhouette both foreign and painfully familiar. I knew at once it was her, though she was not the child I had lost. She was a woman now, her face carved by years I had not seen, her eyes holding secrets I could not touch. She spoke my name, softly, almost experimentally, as though testing if it still belonged to her lips. I wanted to rush into her arms, to gather her like I once had, but something stopped me. There was a distance in her gaze, a shadow that clung to her skin. She was my daughter, yes, but she was also a stranger. Whatever road she had walked, whatever hands had shaped her life in the darkness, they had stolen the child I remembered and replaced her with this haunted figure. My heart broke a second time, not from her absence, but from her changed presence. Even as I held her hands in mine, I could feel how cold they were, how stiff, as if she had forgotten the warmth of touch, as if trust had been beaten out of her somewhere far away. She looked at me with eyes that seemed to ask 1,000 questions, yet she offered no answers. And I, trembling, old, weary, had no courage to press. I was afraid of what she might say, afraid of what truths her return might drag into the light. Don't forget, if these words resonate, to subscribe, to comment, to leave a like. It helps more people hear the stories no one dares to tell. I tried to ask her gently about where she had been, who had kept her, what had broken her. But she deflected, each question sliding off her like rain off stone. She spoke in fragments of nights filled with voices, of doors locked tight, of faces that smiled without kindness. She would not name them, not once. It was as if the very syllables were poisonous, too dangerous to let free. I could feel her pain in the silence, as palpable as a bruise you dare not touch. The strangest thing was the way she avoided mirrors. In the kitchen, where the glass of the cupboard reflected a faint image, she would shift her chair until her face was out of view. In my bedroom, where the old oval mirror hung, she draped a scarf over it without asking. I recognized the gesture. It was the same one I had done years before, when I could no longer bear to see myself, when grief had hollowed me into something unrecognizable. Seeing her do it chilled me to the bone. The nights after her return were restless. She would wander the house, her footsteps soft but constant, circling as if she were searching for something long lost. I would lie awake, listening, my old clock ticking in counterpoint. Sometimes she would pause outside my door, and I could feel her presence there, like a question unspoken. I longed to open it, to take her in my arms as I should have done years ago, but something held me back. It was as if she belonged more to the shadows now than to the warmth of my embrace. And yet, despite the distance, despite the strangeness, she was mine, my daughter, my blood. And I knew with a certainty that pierced me like a blade that whatever stories had shaped her absence, whatever ghosts had followed her home, I would have to face them. Don't forget, you can share your thoughts below and let others know what you feel. It means more than you realize. Her presence changed the air in the house. Rooms that had stood empty for decades now breathed differently, as if they recognized her return and were holding their breath. The walls seemed to listen, the floorboards to soften beneath her steps. Yet the silence between us was heavier than any sound. I watched her move, watched her hands trace the edges of furniture she had once known as a child, and I realized she remembered more than she let on. The way her fingertips lingered on the wooden crib stored in the corner, the way her gaze caught the faded drawings on the wall, told me that somewhere deep inside, the little girl I had lost was still alive. But she was buried under layers of years I could not touch, years that belonged to others, years filled with secrets. At night, when I sat by the old kitchen table with my tea growing cold, she would sometimes sit across from me. Her eyes would follow the steam curling upward, but she never drank, never reached out. It was as though she was measuring the distance between us, testing how far the bridge of blood and memory could reach. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with words of comfort, but every syllable I considered felt clumsy, too fragile to carry the weight of what lay between us. One evening, she finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, strained, as if unused to speaking freely. "I used to dream of this house," she said. Just that? No explanation, no elaboration, but it was enough to send a shiver through me. I asked her what she dreamed, though my voice cracked like old wood. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the candlelight flickering on the table. Not dreams, more like shadows of dreams, places that pulled at me, but they weren't safe. That word safe cut me, because wasn't I the one who had promised her safety? Hadn't I sworn to shield her from everything cruel and dark? And yet here she was, grown and scarred, speaking of safety as if it were something she had never truly known. I reached across the table, slowly, carefully, until my hand hovered over hers. She did not pull away, but she did not lean into it either. She remained still, her skin cool under my trembling fingers. It was the first time I touched her since her return, and it felt both like a homecoming and a farewell. The days turned into a rhythm of small routines. I would cook, though she barely ate. I would light candles, though she often drifted into the dark corners of the house, preferring shadows. Sometimes she disappeared for hours, wandering the woods at the edge of the village, only to return with her clothes damp from mist and her eyes even more distant. I never asked where she went. I feared the answer. There were moments when I caught her staring at the old clock on the wall, the one that had ticked through her absence. Its steady beat seemed to hold her attention, as if it spoke a language she alone could understand. Once, in the hush of twilight, she whispered, "Time doesn't move the same way everywhere." I didn't know what she meant, but the solemnity in her voice kept me from laughing it off as nonsense. The villagers soon learned of her return. Their curiosity burned like fire through dry grass. They knocked on my door, brought bread, flowers, and too many questions. Where was she all these years? What happened to her? How did she come back? Their words swirled around us like gnats, irritating and insistent. I tried to shield her from their stares, their hunger for a story they could whisper about at their dinner tables. But she felt their eyes. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed when we walked down the lane. She had come back, but she was never truly free. One night, I woke to the sound of crying. At first, I thought it was a memory, an echo of her childhood, when her soft sobs had called me from sleep. But when I opened my door, I saw her sitting on the floor of the hallway, knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her arms. The sight broke me. I knelt beside her, my old bones aching, and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched, then stilled. "I can't go back there," she whispered. The words slipped out like a secret she hadn't meant to share. My heart pounded. Back where? To whom? I wanted to ask, but I was terrified of the answer. Instead, I only whispered back, "You're here now. You're home." But even as I said it, I knew home was not the same for her. It was a word fractured by years of absence, a place she belonged to, in blood, but not in memory. Don't forget, if this story holds you, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe so it can find others who need to hear it. In the weeks that followed, she began to leave traces of her past in small fragments, as if testing how much truth I could bear. She mentioned a room without windows, a key that never turned, voices that spoke of her as though she were not there. Each fragment was like a shard of glass cutting into me, but I dared not push too hard. I knew if I reached for the whole truth, she might retreat again into silence, or worse, leave, and I could not lose her a second time. Still, the questions gnawed at me. Who had taken her? Why had she been returned now after all these years? And why did her eyes, when they met mine, sometimes seem to hold a glimmer of accusation, as though I were somehow complicit in her suffering? One afternoon, while she slept in the chair by the window, I found myself standing in front of the old mirror she had covered. I lifted the scarf slowly, almost reverently, and for the first time in years looked at myself fully. The face staring back was lined, weary, etched with grief. But behind my reflection, I thought I saw her standing, watching, her eyes hollow and unblinking. I turned quickly, but she was still asleep. I lowered the scarf again, my heart pounding. The mirror became another secret between us, a symbol of all we dared not face. She avoided it, and I, too, began to fear its depths, as if it might reveal truths we were both not ready to confront. And then came the night she spoke of him, not by name, never by name, only as the one who held the key. Her voice that night was like the scraping of metal against stone, thin and trembling, yet filled with a weight that pressed on my chest. She sat in the half-dark, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles whitened, and she whispered about him, the one who held the key. That was all she called him. Not father, not master, not stranger. Just the one with the key. The word itself carried a terrible finality, as if it unlocked more than doors, as if it had power over her very breath. I sat beside her in silence, my hands folded in my lap, too afraid that if I moved or spoke too loudly, she would close herself off again. She said he never raised his voice, never struck her in the ways people imagine cruelty must look. His violence, she explained, was colder, quieter, like the frost that kills a flower without a sound. He decided when she ate, when she slept, when she was allowed to see the light. He carried the key always on a chain around his neck, and with it, he carried her life. She told me she used to listen for the sound of that key. How it rattled softly when he walked, how it scraped the lock with deliberate slowness. That sound became her clock, her measure of time in the windowless room. Not the rising sun, not the turning of seasons, only the key. And sometimes, she said, she would dream of stealing it, of breaking it, of swallowing it whole so he could never use it again. But in the dream, even when the key was gone, the door would not open. I wanted to cry out, to demand names, places, anything that could anchor her nightmare into the real world where I might fight it, where I might make sense of it. But when I opened my mouth, no words came. All I could manage was to cover her hands with mine, to remind her that she was here, that the door was behind her, locked no more. The following days she grew quieter, as if even the memory of speaking about him had drained her. She moved like a shadow through the house, and sometimes I wondered if she would disappear again, not taken this time, but by her own choice, slipping back into the void that had claimed her youth. My fear became constant, a sharp ache that lived in my chest. Every time I woke and did not see her, my body braced for the absence, for the silence I knew too well. One morning, I found her in the garden, standing barefoot on the cold earth, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The dawn light painted her face in shades of gold and sorrow. She looked older than her years, and yet fragile, as if the wind itself could scatter her into the air. When I called her name, she did not turn. Only after a long silence did she whisper, "I don't know who I am anymore." Her words cut me more deeply than anything before, because I too had asked myself that very question for decades. Who was I without her? What was a mother when her child was lost? And now she had returned, but the answer did not come. We were both hollowed, both fractured, two mirrors reflecting each other's emptiness. I tried to give her little anchors. I made her favorite soup, though I wasn't sure if she remembered. I showed her the box of old photographs, yellowed with time, hoping something would stir. She looked at them blankly, as though they were the faces of strangers. Once she lifted one and asked, "Is this me?" I nodded, my throat burning. She studied the child in the picture for a long time before placing it gently back into the box. "She looks happy," she murmured. Nights were the hardest. I often woke to find her wandering again, pacing the narrow halls, her fingers brushing against the walls as if feeling for hidden doors. The clock ticked louder in those hours, and sometimes I thought I heard the faint echo of metal against metal, the phantom rattle of the key. Once, in the pale light of the moon, I saw her standing before the covered mirror, her hands hovering over the scarf as though she wanted to tear it away. But she didn't. She turned instead and walked back into the dark. The villagers' whispers grew sharper. Some said she was cursed, others that she had gone mad, and still others that she was not my daughter at all, but an impostor, a stranger who had come to claim a place that wasn't hers. Their cruelty was nothing new to me, but hearing it again, now directed at her, made my blood burn. I wanted to shield her, to silence their tongues, but I had no strength left to fight them all. Instead, I kept her close as she would allow. Don't forget, you can help carry this story further by leaving a comment, a like, or subscribing. It means more than you think. Then one evening, as the candlelight flickered against the walls, she spoke again of him. Her voice was steady this time, almost calm. "He told me once that I belonged to him because no one else wanted me. He said my mother had let me go." She turned her eyes to mine, and I felt the accusation buried there. My heart clenched. I wanted to scream that it was a lie, that I had searched, that I had torn myself apart for her. But the years between us, the silence, the absence, stood heavier than my words. I whispered instead, "I never stopped wanting you." But she only looked at me, as if weighing the truth in my eyes. That night I could not sleep. I sat awake, listening to the clock, listening to her restless movements in the other room. I thought of the key, of the door that had trapped her, of the lies he must have poured into her fragile ears. And I thought of all the years I had spent staring at empty spaces, wondering if she lived, if she breathed, while he whispered poison into her heart. The next morning, I found her sitting at the table with a sheet of paper in front of her. Her hand trembled as she wrote, each letter jagged, uncertain, as if the very act of writing was foreign. When she saw me, she slid the paper away quickly, folding it in half. But I caught a glimpse of the words, half-formed names, fragments of places, scribbles that might have been maps or memories. She looked at me then, and for the first time there was something in her eyes besides emptiness. There was fire. And in that fire, I saw both hope and terror. The paper became her constant companion in the days that followed. She kept it close, folding and unfolding it until the creases grew so deep that the words threatened to disappear into them. I noticed how she wrote only at certain hours, when the house was quiet, when the village was wrapped in silence, when even the clocks seemed to slow. She would sit at the table with a candle burning low, her head bowed, her lips moving as if reciting things she did not dare to speak aloud. Sometimes she would scribble quickly, almost feverishly, and other times she would sit frozen, the pencil trembling in her hand, as though whatever memory she tried to draw up was too painful to put on paper. Once I came into the room without her hearing me. She was staring at the page, tears running down her cheeks, but not wiping them away. When she noticed me, she quickly folded the sheet and pressed it against her chest. "Not yet," she whispered. I didn't press her. I only nodded and placed a cup of tea beside her, though I knew she wouldn't drink it. The air between us was heavy with unspoken things. Every gesture, every glance carried a weight of questions and answers half-formed. I wanted to know the whole of her story, yet at the same time I feared it with all my being. Because once it was spoken, once it was laid bare, I could never take it back, never undo it. Some truths I knew had the power to destroy even the faintest chance of healing. The nights grew longer, colder. She stopped sleeping altogether, or if she did, it was only in fragments. Restless dozes from which she woke with a jolt, her eyes wide, her breath ragged. I could hear her moving through the house at all hours, opening and closing doors softly, walking barefoot over the creaking boards. Sometimes she stood outside my room so close that I could hear her breathing through the door. I would lie there with my heart pounding, wondering if she wanted to come in, if she wanted to speak, or if she simply wanted proof that I was still there. And then, one night, she brought me the paper. Her hands shook as she laid it before me, as though the act of parting with it cost her something vital. "Read," she said, her voice barely audible. I unfolded the paper slowly. The words were scattered, messy, but I understood. Names, some I recognized from the village, some foreign. A few were crossed out violently, leaving only torn paper beneath. There were drawings of doors, of a single key, of eyes staring out from dark corners. And then there were fragments of sentences, no light. Voices behind walls. The chain rattles. She gave me away. That last one made my vision blur, my throat close. "She told me," my daughter whispered, "that my mother gave me away. That's what he said too, that I was nothing, that no one wanted me." Her voice cracked, but her eyes held mine with a raw intensity. I shook my head, tears spilling down my face. "Never, never once did I let you go. They lied to you. They took you from me." My words tumbled out desperately, as though saying them aloud might break the chains that still bound her, but she didn't look relieved. Instead, she looked almost stricken, torn between belief and doubt. "How can I know?" she whispered. "How can I trust what is true when my whole life was built on lies?" I had no answer. I could only reach across the table, my old hand covering hers, willing her to feel the pulse of my love beneath the thin skin. She didn't pull away. For the first time since her return, she let her hand rest under mine. The following days, she began to speak more. Never in full stories, but in pieces, scattered like shards of broken glass. She told me about the sound of footsteps in hallways that never led to doors, about a voice that whispered through walls at night, about punishments that left no marks on the skin but carved deep into the soul. She spoke of years counted not by seasons but by the number of times the lock clicked shut. I listened, though every word cut me open. I tried not to weep in front of her, but sometimes I failed. She would watch me, her eyes unreadable, as if measuring how much I could bear. The villagers kept pressing. Their curiosity had grown into suspicion. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "She is not who you think she is. I crumpled it with shaking hands, unwilling to show it to her. They didn't understand, couldn't understand. To them, she was a mystery returned from nowhere, a story to be picked apart. To me, she was my blood, no matter how twisted her path had been. Don't forget, you can keep this story alive by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts. Every word of support matters. Then something shifted. One evening, she asked me about her father. The question pierced me like a blade. She had never known him. He had left long before she was born, leaving only silence behind. I told her the truth, as much as there was to tell, that he had been a restless man, that he had walked away from us before he even tried to stay. She listened quietly, her face unreadable, then said, "He told me my father was still there, that he was watching, that he would come for me." Her words chilled me. I wanted to dismiss them, to tell her it was impossible, but the certainty in her tone stopped me. Whoever he was, he had woven lies around her so tightly that they had become her reality. I realized then that the man with the key had not only stolen her body, but tried to steal her very identity. As the weeks turned into months, I saw changes in her, small ones, almost imperceptible. She began to eat a little more, though slowly, suspiciously, as though food itself might betray her. She sat longer at the table with me, and sometimes, just sometimes, I caught a flicker of softness in her gaze. Once she even laughed quietly, briefly, when the cat leapt onto the table and knocked over a cup. The sound was so foreign, so fragile, that tears filled my eyes instantly. She noticed and stopped laughing, her face closing again like a shutter. But for that heartbeat of time, I had heard my daughter. Still, the shadows never fully left her. She refused to go near the church, avoided gatherings, and when the clock struck certain hours, she would grow rigid, her eyes distant, as if transported elsewhere. I began to realize that time itself was fractured for her, that past and present wove together in ways I could not untangle. One night she came to me, her eyes burning with a strange determination. "I want to go back," she said. My heart stopped. "Back where?" I asked, though I already knew. "To the place he kept me. I need to see it. I need to know if it was real." Panic surged through me. The thought of returning her to that place, of reopening wounds that had barely begun to close, terrified me. But her eyes told me she would go with or without me. And I could not let her face those ghosts alone. So I agreed. And that was how, one bleak morning with frost clinging to the windows, I found myself walking beside my daughter down the path that led into the woods. The woods that had once held only silence for me, but now threatened to reveal the darkest secrets of her lost years. The frost crackled beneath our feet as we moved into the woods, the trees towering above us like silent witnesses. The air was sharp, cutting at my throat, and the sky hung low, heavy with the weight of winter clouds. She walked ahead of me, her shoulders hunched, her steps quick, as though something invisible pulled her forward. I followed, my heart pounding against my ribs, each breath tasting of dread. I had not walked this deep into the forest in decades, not since the day I first screamed her name into its silence and heard nothing in return. The path narrowed, roots clawing up through the earth, branches brushing against our coats. She moved with a strange certainty, as though her body remembered what her mind barely dared to name. I could see the tremor in her hands, though, clenched tight at her sides. The deeper we went, the colder it became, not just the air, but the very atmosphere, a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The forest swallowed the sounds of the village until only the crunch of our steps and the distant caw of a crow remained. After what felt like hours, she stopped abruptly, I nearly stumbled into her. She stood rigid, staring at a cluster of trees where the bark was darker, scarred. My eyes followed her gaze, and then I saw it. A structure half hidden, decayed, crouching among the shadows. It was small, made of stone and wood, its roof sagging, its windows nothing but hollow eyes. At first glance, it might have been an abandoned hut, forgotten by time. But as we drew closer, I felt it. The air thickened, heavy with the residue of what had happened within those walls. Her breath quickened, a shallow rasp. "Here," she whispered. I froze. My hand shook as I clutched the shawl tighter around me. This place, this ruin, was where she had been. My daughter, my baby, had spent her stolen years behind its walls. She stepped forward, her boots sinking into the damp earth. I wanted to stop her, to pull her back, but my legs felt rooted. I could only watch as she reached for the door. The wood was warped, the hinges rusted, but when she touched it, it gave way with a low groan, as though it had been waiting for her return. Inside, the darkness was immediate, swallowing the pale light of the day. She entered without hesitation, and I forced myself to follow. The air smelled of mold and earth, but beneath it lingered something else. A faint metallic tang that made my stomach twist. My eyes adjusted slowly. The walls were bare stone, damp and cracked. In the center of the room was a chair, broken, its wood splintered but still standing like a relic. Against the far wall, I saw a heavy iron lock hanging from a door that no longer closed properly. The sight of it made bile rise in my throat. She stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, trembling. Her eyes darted from corner to corner, as if expecting the shadows to move. I reached for her, but she lifted her hand, stopping me. "I know this place," she said softly. "Every stone, every crack." Her voice broke. "It's smaller than I remember, but it feels the same. The air, it hasn't changed." Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to cover her ears, to shield her eyes, to tear down the very walls that had held her. But she continued, her words spilling out like water from a burst dam. "He would sit there." She pointed at the chair. "He would jingle the key, so I knew he was there. He didn't always speak. Sometimes he just sat in silence, letting me know he could open the door whenever he wished, but I could not." Her body shook with each word. I used to count the sounds of the key against the stone over and over, just to keep from screaming. I could hardly breathe. My chest ached, my vision blurred. I wanted to burn the chair, smash the lock, erase it all from existence. But I could see in her eyes that she needed it to be here, that she needed to confront it, to prove to herself that it was real and not only a nightmare. She moved to the wall, her fingers brushing against the damp stone. "Here," she whispered. I scratched marks, one for every day, but then I lost count. Time dissolved. The marks are gone now. Her hand slid down, trembling. Sometimes I thought I was gone too. I could no longer hold back. I stepped forward, wrapped my arms around her from behind, pressed my cheek against her shoulder. She stiffened at first, her body rigid, but then slowly, painfully, she leaned into me. We stood there in the dark, the ghosts of her childhood pressing around us, and I whispered into her hair, "You're here. You survived. You're mine. Don't forget. If you want to hear more of this journey, to let others know they are not alone, subscribe, like, and share. These stories live because they are heard." We left the hut as the light faded, the forest stretching long shadows across our path. She walked more slowly now, her shoulders bent, as though carrying a great weight. I wanted to ask her if she felt lighter, having faced it, or heavier. But I did not dare. I only walked beside her, my hand hovering close to hers, ready if she should reach. That night, back at the house, she did not wander. She sat by the fire, silent, staring into the flames as though they held the shape of her past. I sat with her until my eyes grew heavy, but I dared not leave her side. When I finally dozed off in the chair, I woke to find her draping a blanket over me. Her touch was fleeting, almost hesitant, but it was the first time she had reached for me of her own accord. The following days, she spoke little, but I could see a change in her. She began to write more, filling the paper with longer fragments, sometimes whole sentences. She never let me read them, not yet, but I noticed that the words no longer looked jagged. They flowed more evenly, as if she was reclaiming her own voice. And then, one evening, she asked me a question I had dreaded since her return. "Why didn't you come for me?" Her voice was not accusatory, but the words tore through me all the same. I tried to explain the endless search, the prayers, the nights spent wandering the village with her name on my lips. I told her about the years of silence, the doors closed in my face, the authorities who shrugged, the neighbors who turned away. My voice shook with every word, with every failure. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time, then whispered, "I used to dream you would burst through the door. Every night I waited, but you never came." I wept then, openly, helplessly. She did not move to comfort me, but she did not turn away either. She sat with me through the storm of my grief, her eyes fixed on the fire. Later that night I heard her voice through the door of her room. She was praying, softly, brokenly. Not the prayers of the church, but her own fragmented pleas, whispered confessions. She prayed for light, for silence, for release. And I realized then that healing was not a straight path, but a labyrinth. One we would walk together, step by fragile step, even if it took the rest of our lives. The next morning, she stood by the window, looking out at the rising sun. Her face was pale, but her eyes seemed clearer, steadier. She turned to me and said, "I want to find him." The room spun around me. The words echoed like a bell, each syllable vibrating through my bones. She wanted to find the one with the key. The silence after her words was suffocating. The fire in the hearth crackled, the old clock ticked, but everything else in the room froze. I stared at her, my hands clutching the armrest of the chair, knuckles white. I wanted to shout no, to forbid her, to lock the door and keep her safe within these walls where no shadow could reach her. But when I met her eyes, I saw that the decision had already rooted itself in her soul. It wasn't a whim, nor a passing thought. It was a need, the kind of need that carves itself into bone. Her gaze was unwavering, though I could see the flicker of fear behind it. "I have to know," she whispered, "if he's still alive, if he's still—" holding the key. Her voice trembled on that last word, and I shuddered. I shook my head, tears rising unbidden. Why would you want to see him again? Why not let the past rot where it belongs? She lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening around the windowsill. "Because he still owns parts of me. Because every time I close my eyes, I hear the chain. I feel the lock. Until I face him, until I know he can no longer reach me, I'll never be free." Her words struck me with a cruel truth. I had spent decades trying to bury the memory of her loss, trying to stitch my life back together with silence and resignation. But silence had not freed me, and I realized it would not free her either. Still, the thought of seeing him, This man, this monster who had taken her, poisoned her with lies, carved scars I could never erase, made me tremble with rage and terror. My mind screamed with visions of confrontation, of vengeance, of blood. And yet, I was old. My body was frail, my strength gone. What could I do except stand by her side? She turned then, facing me fully, her hands clenched into fists. "Will you come with me?" The question pierced me. She was asking me to walk into the darkness with her, to face not only him, but all the years of silence that lay between us. My throat tightened. I wanted to refuse, but I could not leave her to carry this burden alone. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll come." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked younger, like the girl I had once known. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation. She wrote more than ever, filling pages with fragments names, half-remembered places, scraps of directions. She spread them out on the table, tracing connections with trembling fingers. I watched her, both proud and terrified. Each note was a step closer to him. The villagers noticed her intensity. They whispered more openly now, their curiosity curdling into suspicion. Some said she was bewitched, others that she was dangerous. One woman muttered loudly enough for me to hear, "That girl is cursed. Nothing good will come from her return." My daughter heard it too. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Later that night, though, I heard her pacing, whispering to herself as though warding off the poison of their words. Don't forget, if these words move you, leave a comment, subscribe, or give a like. It helps others hear stories that too often remain hidden. The first real lead came in the form of a name. She wrote it again and again on the paper, the letters jagged, pressed so hard into the page that they nearly tore it. When I asked her who it was, she only said, "One of his." I didn't understand whether it was an accomplice, a neighbor, another captive, but I could see it mattered. The name was unfamiliar to me, foreign-sounding, not of our village. A week later, she approached me at dawn, her coat already on, her eyes blazing with determination. "We need to go." "Where?" I asked, my heart hammering. She handed me a scrap of paper with the name and a rough direction. "I remember the path. My feet know it, even if my mind doesn't." And so, I followed her once more into the unknown. The road led us far beyond the woods, into fields that stretched gray under the winter sky. The land felt desolate, forgotten, as though no one had set foot there for years. She walked quickly, her breath sharp in the cold, her eyes fixed ahead. I struggled to keep up, my old legs aching, but I would not let her go alone. After hours of walking, we came upon a cluster of ruins barns collapsing under their own weight, stones scattered like broken teeth. She stopped abruptly, her whole body rigid. "Here," she whispered. I looked around, bewildered. "Here? There's nothing?" But she shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, there was. I remember." She moved toward one of the barns, its roof caved in, its walls covered in moss. She stepped inside, her hand trailing along the wood. I followed, the smell of rot and damp earth filling my nose. Inside, the shadows clung thickly, and the silence was oppressive. "There was a man here," she said, softly. "Not him. Another. He brought food sometimes. He never spoke to me, not once, but I remember his boots, the sound of them. He's the one who took me deeper into the woods the first time." I felt sick. I gripped the wall to steady myself. The thought of accomplices, of others who had known and said nothing, who had helped. My rage burned hotter than I thought possible at my age. Suddenly, she crouched, her hands brushing the dirt floor. She dug with trembling fingers until she uncovered something small, rusted, half buried, a piece of metal. She held it up, her breath catching. It was a fragment of a chain. Her hands shook as she stared at it. I could see the memories flooding her, the ghost pressing in. I stepped forward, gently closing her fingers around the rusted metal. "It's just iron now," I whispered. "It has no power." But her eyes told me otherwise. To her, it was proof. Proof that her memories were not dreams. Proof that he had been real, that the chain had bound her. Proof that somewhere, perhaps, he still lived. That night, back in the safety of the house, she clutched the fragment in her hands as she slept by the fire. I watched her, the flames dancing over her face, and I realized that this journey was far from over, because she would not rest until she found him. And I, though my body trembled with age and fear, would walk with her into whatever darkness awaited. And in my heart, a terrible question grew louder with each passing day. What would we do if we truly found him? The question gnawed at me through every waking hour and haunted me in my sleep. What would happen if we found him? My mind played through every possibility. In some twisted part of me, I imagined confronting him face to face, screaming into the silence of his cruelty, demanding to know why he had stolen my child and carved scars into her very being. But then the weight of my age pressed down, reminding me of my frailty. My hands, once strong, now shook, carrying a pot of water. What defense could I offer? What vengeance could I take? And yet, I could not tell her no. The fire in her eyes was something new, something fragile, but powerful. To extinguish it would be to trap her once more, this time in a prison of despair I had built with my own fear. So I said nothing. I only stayed close, listening, waiting, holding my silence like a shield. She grew more restless. The nights that had once been spent wandering the house were now filled with scribbling, page after page of jagged words and rough drawings. She was chasing memories, chasing fragments of paths and places. Sometimes she would stop abruptly, staring at her writing as though the paper itself betrayed her. "I can't tell what's real," she muttered once, clutching her head in her hands. "I don't know which pieces are mine and which are his." I went to her then, kneeling by her chair, placing my hands gently over hers. "They are all yours," I whispered, "even the ones he gave you against your will. They live in you, and you decide what to do with them now." She looked at me, eyes wide, as if hearing such words for the first time. For a moment, she softened, but the fire returned quickly. One evening, as the wind howled outside and rattled the shutters, she turned to me and said, "He's not far." Her voice was so certain, so steady, that I felt my skin prickle. "How do you know?" I asked, my throat dry. She touched her temple lightly, "Because the sound of the key hasn't left me. It's here, always, and I think he still keeps it, somewhere near." Her words chilled me, and yet I believed her. Some bonds, no matter how cruel, stretch across years and miles like invisible threads. She could feel him still, and I could not dismiss that. The next morning, she insisted we walk again. She led me further into the wilds beyond the village, her pace brisk, her step sure. I followed, my breath ragged, my heart heavy with dread. The land grew rougher, more desolate, until we came to an old road long overgrown with weeds. Stones jutted out of the ground like broken bones, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant caw of crows. She stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed ahead. "There," she whispered. I followed her gaze. A house stood at the end of the road. Not quite a ruin, not yet. Its roof sagged but held, its windows dark, its walls covered with ivy that clawed its way upward like grasping fingers. It looked abandoned, but I knew immediately by the way her body tensed that it was not. My knees trembled. My instinct screamed to turn back, to pull her with me, to never let her step foot in that place. But she moved forward, her face pale yet resolute. I had no choice but to follow. As we drew nearer, I could see details that made my blood run cold. The door bore deep scratches, as if someone had clawed at it in desperation. The windows were covered from within, no light escaping. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it. The rattle of metal. A sound so small, so ordinary, yet it struck me like thunder. She froze, her breath catching. Her whole body shook, but she did not retreat. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. "Yes," I breathed, my heart pounding. The sound came again, faint but deliberate. A chain, a key. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for mine. I clutched it tightly, our fingers locking together like two souls clinging to the edge of a cliff. My old bones ached, but I held her, unwilling to let go. We stood there, before the house, listening to the ghostly music of metal against metal. I could feel the years collapsing into this single moment, all the nights of weeping, all the prayers whispered into silence, all the days she had lived in shadows. It had led us here, to this house, to this sound. Suddenly the rattle stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Don't forget, if you are still with us in this journey, give a like, leave a comment, subscribe. Stories like this matter because they remind us of truths too often buried. A figure stood in the doorway. At first, he was only a silhouette, tall, broad, his face hidden by the gloom. But even in shadow, I could feel his presence, the heaviness of his gaze, the authority he carried like a cloak. My daughter's grip on my hand tightened until my bones ached. He stepped forward into the pale light. His hair was gray, his skin weathered, his body stooped with age. But in his eyes, dark, piercing, cruel, there was no weakness. He looked at her, and then at me, with a calmness that chilled my blood. "So," he said, his voice low, deliberate, and terrifyingly steady. "You came back." I felt my daughter stiffen beside me, her breath ragged, her lips parted, but no words came. She simply stared at him, her eyes wide, her body trembling like a leaf in the wind. He tilted his head, and in that small gesture, I saw the same power he must have wielded over her all those years. Even aged, even bent, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed he still held the key. And around his neck, on a thin chain, it hung. The key, rusted, worn, but unmistakable. My daughter gasped. Her knees buckled, and I caught her just in time. Her eyes were fixed on the glint of metal, and I knew this was the sound that had haunted her, the weight that had followed her across years and miles. The man smiled faintly, a cruel twist of lips. "Did you think you could ever be free?" he asked softly. My rage surged like fire, hot and wild. For decades I had dreamed of this moment, though I never believed it would come. The man who had stolen my child stood before me, old but unbroken, the monster still alive in his bones. My hands shook, not with fear, but with fury. I stepped forward, though my body trembled with weakness. "You destroyed her," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You destroyed everything." He laughed, a hollow sound. "No, I shaped her. I kept her. She is mine." My daughter cried out then, a sound that split the air like glass shattering. She lunged forward, her hand outstretched toward the key. He moved to step back, but her fingers brushed the chain. For an instant, time froze. The key swung between them, the symbol of everything he had stolen, everything he had bound. And in that instant,
I knew. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of a reckoning neither of us could have imagined. Her fingers grazed the chain, and for a heartbeat it seemed the air itself stopped moving. His hand shot up, quick despite the weight of age, gripping the key and pressing it to his chest. His eyes narrowed, and though his voice was calm, it trembled with something dangerous. "Not yet," he said, almost tenderly. "Not until you understand." My daughter recoiled, her breath ragged, her face pale as wax. But she did not retreat far. She stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides, her body quivering with the fury of all those stolen years. I could see her jaw tightening, her eyes locked on the rusted piece of metal, the way a starving soul fixes on food. I reached for her arm, my old hand trembling. "Come away," I whispered, though I knew she would not. She shook her head, her voice hoarse. "I won't run any more." The man studied her, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "You sound braver than you are. Do you think you can strip me of what is mine? You belong to me. You always have." The words struck me like knives. My body surged with a rage I had thought buried long ago. I stepped forward, though my knees threatened to give way. My voice was cracked, but it carried the weight of a mother's grief. "She never belonged to you. She is mine. She was always mine." For the first time his smile faltered. His eyes flicked toward me, studying the lines of my face, the tremor in my hands. Perhaps he expected a frail, broken woman, but what he saw was fire. The fire of all the years I had endured, waiting, weeping, refusing to forget. Don't forget. If this story holds you, share it, leave a like, subscribe. It matters more than you think. The silence stretched taut between us. My daughter's breathing echoed in the cold air, shallow and quick. The man's hand remained over the key. His fingers curled around it as though it pulsed with life. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "You think I stole her, but she came willingly." The words sent a shock through me, and I saw the color drain from her face. Her knees bent, as though struck by an invisible blow. "That's not true," she gasped, but his voice slid like oil across the space between us. "You followed, didn't you? You chose the path. You stepped into the shadows because you wanted what only I could give. Do you not remember?" Her body shook, and her hands flew to her temples. "No," she cried, "no!" The sound tore through me, and I rushed to her, wrapping my arms round her trembling frame. She pressed her face into my chest like she had when she was small, but now her cries were guttural, filled with years of torment. "Lies," I spat, glaring at him. "All lies. You twisted her mind. You chained her body. That is all." But he only tilted his head, watching us with that infuriating calm. "If you must believe that, then so be it. But ask her yourself. Ask her why she covered the mirrors. Ask her what she saw when she looked into them." I froze. My heart lurched painfully. He could not know about the mirrors, and yet he did. My daughter stiffened in my arms, her breath hitching. Slowly she pulled away from me, her eyes wild, filled with terror and confusion. "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Stop talking." But he continued, his tone almost gentle. "She knows. Deep down, she knows. That she was not only mine in body, but in spirit. That even now she is bound. The key is only a symbol. The true lock is inside her." My daughter screamed then, a raw sound that echoed through the woods, startling crows from the trees. She lunged forward, her hands clawing for the chain around his neck. This time, she gripped it. Her fingers dug into his skin, yanking with a strength that surprised even me. The chain snapped,
the key falling into her hand with a sharp metallic clang. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. She stumbled back, clutching the key against her chest. Her breath came in sobs, her body shaking violently, but her eyes, oh, her eyes were burning now, not with terror, but with fury. "You don't own me," she gasped, her voice ragged but resolute. "Not any more." The man straightened, his jaw tightening, his calm beginning to crack. "You think a piece of iron frees you?" he snarled. "You think holding that trinket changes the truth? You are marked. You always will be." But she shook her head fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "No, the mark is yours, not mine. I carried your darkness, but it was never mine to keep." Her words pierced the air, and in them I heard not only defiance, but reclamation. She was taking herself back, piece by broken piece. I stepped forward then, placing my hand on her shoulder. "He cannot hurt you now," I whispered. "Not while I'm here. Not while you hold the key." The man's eyes burned with rage, but he said nothing more. He turned, his figure retreating into the darkness of the house. The door slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. My daughter collapsed to her knees, the key still clutched in her fist. I knelt beside her, gathering her into my arms. She wept, shaking so violently that I feared she would shatter, but I held her, rocking gently, whispering the same words I had whispered into her cradle so many years ago. "You are mine. You are safe. You are loved." We stayed there until the light faded, until the cold seeped into our bones. Then, slowly, we rose and walked back to the village. She never let go of the key. That night, she did not pace. She sat by the fire, staring at the rusted metal in her palm. "It's over," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "He doesn't own me anymore." But in her eyes, I saw the truth. The battle was not over. The key was hers now, but the lock inside her still waited to be opened or destroyed. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that this was only the first step. Because monsters do not vanish when the door closes. They linger in the blood, in the shadows, in the silence between heartbeats. And though she had faced him, though she had taken the symbol of his power, the echoes of his voice still lived within her. I prayed then, silently, desperately, that I would live long enough to see her free, truly free. But even as I prayed, I felt the weight of the clock ticking on the wall, its pendulum swinging, reminding me that time was not ours to command. And somewhere in the dark of the house, I thought I heard it again, the faintest rattle of metal. She kept the key with her always, clenched so tightly in her fist that her skin bore its imprint. At night, she would lay it on the table beside her bed, as if daring it to speak, as if testing whether its power remained when it was no longer chained around his neck. I would hear her breathing in the dark, shallow and uneven, and sometimes I thought she was whispering to it, not words of reverence, but words of battle, as though she needed to speak directly to the object that had bound her youth. Days passed, though time seemed strange in those weeks, stretched and folded, as though the key itself bent the hours. The villagers kept their distance. They knew something had shifted. Their whispers sharpened into warnings. It would have been better if she had stayed gone. Some ghosts are not meant to be returned. But I ignored them. I had lived too long in their judgment. My only focus was her. She grew quieter, but not in the same hollow way as before. This silence was deliberate, as though she was listening inward, measuring herself against the echoes of him. Sometimes she would place the key in the fire, holding it there with tongs until it glowed red, then remove it and set it on stone to cool. She never explained why, but
I understood. She was testing it, stripping it of the sanctity it once held, making it ordinary, making it hers. One evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon and the house was filled with amber light, she turned to me suddenly. "Do you ever think," she said, her voice calm but steady, "that I came back too late?" The words cut me deeply. "No," I said, my throat tight. "Never too late." Her eyes searched mine, desperate and uncertain. "But what is left of me? He took so much. Sometimes I think the girl you loved is gone, and what's left is only what he made." I shook my head fiercely, gripping her hands. "You are more than his shadows. You are my daughter, blood of my blood. Nothing he did can change that." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, she leaned into me without hesitation. She pressed her forehead against mine, and in that moment I felt the fragile thread of connection reweave itself, thin but unbreakable. Don't forget, if this story stays with you, if it touches something hidden inside, leave a like, a comment, subscribe. Every small act helps these words reach another soul who needs them. The winter gave way slowly to spring. The earth softened, the air carried the scent of thawing soil, and faint blossoms appeared on the trees. With the turning of the season, she began to walk outside more. She wandered the fields, sometimes with me, sometimes alone, always with the key in her pocket. When the villagers stared, she did not flinch. Her shoulders straightened, her steps grew steadier. She was claiming space in the world again. One morning, she surprised me. She laid the key on the kitchen table, its rusted metal dull in the pale light. "It's only iron now," she said. Her voice trembled, but she smiled faintly. "It can't open anything anymore." I reached out, covering it with my hand. "You opened yourself," I whispered. "That is enough." She nodded, though her eyes were far away, as though listening to something I could not hear. That night I woke to the sound of the fire crackling. She was sitting by the hearth, the key in her hand again, staring into the flames. I approached silently, my heart aching. She turned, and her face glowed with a strange calm. "I've decided," she said softly. "Decided what?" I asked. She lifted the key, holding it above the fire. "It's time." Before I could answer, she dropped it into the flames. The iron hissed, the smell of rust and smoke filling the room. For a moment, I panicked, afraid of what this act might unleash. But she watched calmly, her eyes reflecting the fire. Slowly, the key glowed red, then sank into the embers until it was only another piece of metal, indistinguishable from the rest. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, as though she had been holding it for years. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile grew. "It's over," she whispered. I gathered her in my arms, rocking her as the flames devoured the last of that cursed object. And for the first time, I believed her. In the days that followed, I noticed the change. She still carried the scars, still woke sometimes in the night, still avoided mirrors. But there was light in her eyes now, a light I had not seen since she was a child. She spoke more freely, even laughed, a sound so fragile and beautiful it made me weep. She helped me in the garden, her hands in the soil, planting seeds as though stitching herself back into the fabric of life. One evening, as we watched the sunset together, she slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "For not giving up on me." I pressed her hand, my heart aching with love and sorrow. "I never could. The years ahead will not be simple. The past cannot be erased. The wounds will never fully vanish. But she is here. She is alive. And though the echoes of his cruelty may follow her, She carries them not as chains, but as scars, a testament to survival, not defeat. And I, in the twilight of my life, have been given back my child. Not as she was, but as she is. Changed, wounded, strong. The clock still ticks, the mirror still hangs covered, the seasons still turn. But now, when I hear her laughter in the garden, when I see her eyes catching the light, I know. He did not win. She came back. And that is enough. Don't forget, if this story touched you, leave a like, share your thoughts in a comment, and subscribe. Not for me, but so that the voices of the broken, the silenced, the survivors will not be lost to the shadows again.